It is finally time to talk about Sins of the Mother by Rob J. Hayes and Bonds of Chaos by Zach Argyle. Hello everyone, welcome back to A Fictional Escapist. My name is Kris, and today's video is a couple of rapid book reviews. So we have War Eternal Book 4, this is Sins of the Mother by Rob J. Hayes, and what better time with Book 5 just around the corner. And we also have the finale of Threadlight, Bonds of Chaos by Zach Argyle. I read these a little while ago, so forgive my memory. I have written reviews, so I am probably going to look at the screen a little bit because I wrote these reviews a while ago. The reason I do these in a 2-to-1 video format is because they are sequels or series continuations, and I don't want to give too much away, but sometimes that isn't always possible. Before we jump into the reviews, make sure you are checking that description box down below for links to my Discord and social media should you want to come along for the ride. We are going to start off with Sins of the Mother today, book 4 in the War Eternal series. This one doesn't have very many spoilers for the first 3 War Eternal books, and the reason being is it does feel very much like a separate story within a world continuation. So it does follow on from the events of the original trilogy, but to my understanding this was written as a trilogy and then is having 2 books as a continuation in the world, but you can just read the first 3 if that's what you're interested in. So I will go into this one saying that the first 3 War Eternal books are still some of my favourite grimdark books that are out currently available, particularly in the indie and self-pub world. It is an awesome series and a really underrated series in my opinion of the grimdark subgenre, and I had a lot of fun coming back into the world. I will admit I didn't love Sins of the Mother as much as I enjoyed the initial trilogy for the War Eternal, but I still had a decent time. As a reader, I can tell that Rob J. Hayes has spent quite a lot of time in Iskara Helcine, our main protagonist's head, because that quick, dry humour and sarcasm was down pat and still does shine throughout the book. Without giving too much away of the initial plot for the first 3 books, we are still following Iskara Helcine, who is now going by the name of Silver. If you know, you know. This is years after she's given up her kingdom and is no longer referred to as the Corpse Queen. She now lives a relatively simple and peaceful life, far away from any of her prior responsibilities. Unfortunately, for our main protagonist, the world hasn't forgotten who she is or what she's done, and there are still consequences for her actions that are starting to make themselves known. Upon hearing that rifts are being torn apart in the world, allowing creatures from the other world to seep through and cause havoc, Eska suspects foul play with a particular offspring of hers. Her suspicions are confirmed when an old friend turns up to ruin her peace and tell her that her daughter Ciri, or Cyrilith, is missing. These 2 puzzle pieces fit all too well together, and Eska knows the only person who may get through to Ciri is her mother. Risking exposure as something more dangerous than the old woman she's claimed to be, Iskara and a band of new and old faces set off to stop what could be the most catastrophic event yet. That was pretty much the plot summed up in a way that doesn't give too much away, particularly for those earlier books. And like I said, I had a pretty good time with it. Being back in this world was like being wrapped up in a comforting yet sassy blanket. The self-deprecating reflections of one Iskara Helcine were ever present and ever amusing as I flipped through the pages, or I actually listened to this one on audio, and the narrator did a really good job in my opinion. My biggest praise for this book is going to be the characters and also the Easter eggs that were sort of skillfully placed in my opinion throughout the 4th book. So if you've read the first 3 and you're coming back like I did months later to pick up the 4th book, there are little bits and pieces that you'll pick up from the story that happened in the first 3, but this story does feel very much like something holding on its own. The author has carefully made sure that they have been true to the characters and the character development that happened within the first 3 books, which I think is really important for a continuation rather than just another book in the series if the story is progressing. And because of that, it did feel, like I said, quite comforting to come back and be with these characters again. It definitely does make it feel like a natural continuation rather than a stop-start situation, even though it does feel quite like its own tale. It was really fun to see some of the familiar faces and learn how they have grown since the book ended, since book 3 of the main series ended, and it was done through show not tell, which is always fun as a reader because it helps me as a reader visualize a lot more if I'm being shown something rather than told something. And we got to see how those characters had grown through their actions or through things that they had done in between that time lapse of books 3 and 4. There was also quite a few flashback sequences of the development of Escara's daughter, which were quite nice. It did really help set the picture of what we were walking into and what sort of relationship we were walking into between the two. It did build the emotional connection quite well between the reader and the old characters which we'd come to know and love, but also these new characters which were maybe spoken about and touched upon in the initial series, but hadn't really developed. They did get to develop within these flashbacks. The other thing that I will mention for Sins of the Mother is the action sequences and the creatures of the other world. I would love to see a bestiary of some kind for the War Eternal. I think the creatures that come through from the other world are fascinating. I love Sarakas, and I would just love a big blow-up picture of what he looked like. I know we get a little bit of the shadow on the covers of the initial books before they were revamped to the beautiful hardcovers that are out now. Maybe they're on the hardcovers as well. I'm unsure. But having a bestiary for this type of series where you do get otherworldly monsters would be super cool, but they are described in a way which was very visual to me. Hayes had a way of making these monsters and these action sequences feel fresh, even though we had gotten used to them within the first few books, and it just reminded us of how dangerous this world could be. I also still really love the magic system of sources, which are basically described as something that I can't tell you. I almost did, because it is a spoiler for I think book 2 when they discovered that initially. But sources are sort of like marble to larger size stones which carry a particular affiliation within it. So for Escara, she has pyromancy, for example, which means she can utilize fire and heat if she ingests that source. That has consequences because if she holds it for too long, she will start source rejection, which will eventually kill her if she doesn't eat the spice weed, I think it's called, to bring it back up. There's no better way of putting that. So I love this magic system. I love the consequences of it. I like the limitations and also how open and sort of soft it is in terms of there's a lot of things that it can do, but there are still hard rules surrounding it. I can't wait to see what happens in the last book coming out on December 26th, because once again the author has left us on a huge cliffhanger, and knowing that that finale is around the corner excites me as a reader. So I will continue on with the series. Rob J. Hayes has been hit after hit for me personally. I've read this series, and I also read Never Die, which I quite enjoyed, and I listened to that one as well. And I do have another series of his that I would like to try at some point. So that was Sins of the Mother by Rob J. Hayes, book 4 in the War Eternal series. We will now be jumping into Bonds of Chaos, book 3, and the finale of Threadlight by Zach Argyle. Now, I do have to warn you, going into Bonds of Chaos, this rapid review will contain spoilers for books 1 and 2. So if you have not read book 1 or book 2 and you aren't up to date with this series, this is probably a good time to click away. I'll catch you in the next video. Have a good rest of your day. So we are jumping into spoilers in 3, 2, 1. Bonds of Chaos is a perfect namesake for the title of this book. Never has a title been more perfect or more apt for the crescendo of events leading up to a philosophical and action-packed climax. War is building from all sides, and our team may be too late to stop it from taking over everything and everyone. The heralds have returned, and they have deemed themselves gods. Unfortunately for Kris and his team of Threadweavers, the world has also started to praise these dangerous creatures as their saviors. Relic and Lilacs, the heralds, are revered, feared, and respected by the Wastelander army bonded under their control. Coupled with the core seal still being broken and swarms of core spawn also fast approaching their home, it will take everything that our team has to stop the promised destruction that is taking place. Kris and co will have to think on their feet if they're going to save the world this time. Together, they will stop the gods, or they will die trying. I've got to say, this finale was action-packed. Argyle has done such a good job of bringing the elements of book 1 and 2 into book 3 and really upping the stakes in a very skillful way. As a reader, I really appreciated that the characters from the first few books did pop in and out of the story as felt natural to them as characters rather than natural for story progression, and they got to come together to attempt to save the world as a massive family unit. This made the people and the relationships within the book feel real and authentic. This was a group of people from different walks of life with different occupations, different life expectancies, different religious bases and priorities, but when shit hit the fan, they really did work out how to come together, which was such a beautiful homage to how humanity can work together when it's at its best. There are a few things of note here that I really enjoyed, particularly within this last installment, the bonds being one of them. So the title Bonds of Chaos, bonds within the Chroma Wolves, within the Outer Charn, and within the Wastelanders for our Heralds became very apparent and very important to the story within this third installment, which is why I said it was a very apt name for the series finale. We had previously had some snippets of these bonds, particularly between Laurel and the Chroma Wolf Asher, where we sort of start to explore what that bond meant towards the end of book 2, but the way that our characters grew with those bonds and were able to tap into the abilities of who they were bonded to in this book were really well explained and were really cool. I thought that these power-like abilities worked well for the story, and it really did enhance the relationships that we went through with our animal companions on the page. And book 3 really upped the ante with these bonds once again and showed just how far the bonds could stretch. Once again, I do want to say that Argyle has done a very good job of opening up some themes within the pages, which are not thrown in your face as a reader, but more explored as a suggestion, I would say, more than a philosophical pondering that you get in some books which explore similar themes. There was an exploration of trust, testing boundaries, building relationships, building that said trust, and when the need for action outweighs how people are feeling. And I feel like that was all very well interwoven within this third installment. It was also quite well interwoven and suggested throughout the first 2 books, but it really did come to a head here where those questions started to be answered, where the reader may have subconsciously been questioning those things themselves while they were going through. Overall, I had a good time with this series in 2022, and the narration was just phenomenal. Adam Gold is a very good narrator in my opinion, and I've said it before, my main criticism is the characters are too nice and they don't really develop too much out of their niceness. Our main character Kris is the main example here. He's a nice guy, and he continues to be a nice guy, and he gets a little bit more grit, but not a whole lot, in my opinion, throughout the entire series. That's my personal taste. That's not everyone else's personal taste. This story did manage to build on each and every installment quite splendidly, to the point that I wanted to pick up the next book by the end of book 2. I'm very interested to see what Zach does next going forward as an author, and I look forward to watching him grow as a literary artist over the years, because I think that Threadlight has proven that he can grow and he can do so very well when he's writing the book. So I'm very much looking forward to the next project coming from Mr. Argyle, and also he's just a gem to the indie community, so that is always a lovely thing. Those were 2 rapid reviews that I had on my radar from books I read a little while ago. Sorry if they were a little bit shorter, but I did want to get them out there because I said I would review every indie book that I read in 2022. So let me know if you have read either of these. What were your thoughts? Let me know in the comments down below. If you like the content, give it one of those. If you want to see more of it, click subscribe at your will. I'll catch you in the next video. Ciao.